Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kilstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkilstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. One quick note before we get started. I originally recorded this episode when I was a little bit under the weather, so please excuse my voice on this. Otherwise, I can't wait for you to listen. In this special episode, brought to you by Ceres Talent, a marketing recruiting firm run by modern-day marketing matchmakers, we're going to talk about planning for 2024 and what the experts are seeing as marketing leaders are identifying hiring needs and developing headcount budgets for 2024. To help me discuss these topics, I'd like to welcome Sue Keith, Corporate Vice President at Ceres Talent. Sue, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be back.
Yeah, look forward to talking with you again. Always great to chat. And for those that weren't able to catch your last episode where we talked about the state of the hiring union outlook last quarter, why don't we start with you giving a little background on yourself as well as Ceres Talent?
Sure. I lead Ceres Talent. We're a national recruiting firm based in the DC metro area. We specialize exclusively in marketing positions. Well, I should say marketing, communications, product, and creative positions. And the reason for that is every member on our team was a marketer, practitioner before pivoting into recruiting. So we like to say we speak the language, and I think it makes us pretty good at the matchmaking.
Great. So we're here to talk about what hiring managers and marketing managers and leaders should know as they're planning for 2024 headcount budgets and planning for hiring full-time as well as contract marketing talent. So let's start by talking about some of the overall hiring trends. First, how should hiring managers be looking at the soft skills needed on their teams?
You know, I've been in this business for close to 11 years now, and a really interesting trend we've been seeing over the past few years is that soft skills have gained more importance with hiring managers. And of course, relevant functional experience will always be important, but we're seeing hiring managers place more emphasis on attributes such as communication, adaptability, teamwork, and even emotional intelligence, you'll hear. Interestingly, the number one requested trait that our clients say to us is something like we like to call confident diplomacy. They're looking for a person with enough gravitas to come in and affect change, so push the organization to do things differently or more modernly, but do it in a way that their stakeholders are bought in and comfortable with the changes they're pushing for. So when we kick off a search, we always ask the hiring manager to list their top 3 skills for the position. And more frequently these days, their initial response is not about the functional skills for the role. They respond with a list of the top soft skills they're looking for. So we actually have to prompt them to also speak to the key functional skills they're looking for. And, I continue to be surprised by this because I'm always when we ask the question, we are actually asking for functional skills. And then we'll get to the soft skills later, but we're really surprised, but they're jumping ahead and mentioning soft skills. And we're expecting to hear things like demand gen or product marketing or, consumer marketing.
Yeah. Why do you think that that change is happening?
That's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things going on. So, as you well know, the hiring market did a complete flip-flop from 21-22 to this year.
Yeah.
And there are more candidates in the mix. I think, so it's harder for a hiring manager to make a decision on whom to hire because there's so many people to choose from. Also, getting headcount budget, and I talked about this last time, getting headcount budget right now is really hard. So I think it's like you've just gotten the golden Willy Wonka ticket and you don't want to choose the wrong person. So I think there's a lot of things they're thinking about in terms of not just can I find a really good demand gen expert, for example, but I got to make sure this person's going to get along with all the other people in the organization that they're going to work with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I know we talked about this a little bit last time as well, but we talked a little bit about full-time hires versus contractors. How are things trending there?
Definitely trending towards contractors. So there's some folks are still hiring. I mentioned, no one's going to be surprised when I say that this year has been really tough year for job seekers.
Right.
We talk to each person on our team probably talks to one or two people who are looking for a job that right these a day right now. These are just
Yeah.
the marketers. But I'd also say it's been a tough year for marketing leaders. They're being asked to achieve more in terms of revenue or pipeline contribution with, in many cases, what has become a skeletal crew, meaning their team. They're just got so few people on their teams, but they're being asked to do more or the same or even more than the prior year. And, many have had to lay people off, or at a minimum, they haven't been allowed to backfill the people who've left. So as a result, we have seen an increase in leaders bringing on contractors to help fill those gaps. In most cases, your contractor budget comes out of your program's budget. It's separate from your headcount budget. So most marketing leaders have more discretion, or maybe I should say authority,
Yeah.
to hire an interim contractor where they might not have the approval to hire a full-time employee. So we're definitely seeing a shift. We absolutely saw that in 2020 during COVID, where no one was hiring full-time employees because the world had stopped turning and no one knew if it was going to start up again.
Right.
But definitely they still needed, market CMOs and marketing leaders still needed work to get done, and they were able to bring in contractors because that came out of their own program budgets.
Got it. And so another term here, fractional seems to be all the rage. I know I hear it a lot in the work that I do as well. What does this really mean?
That's a really good and really relevant question. So this was really interesting. So we have a sister company called HRQ, and we specialize in marketing positions. They specialize exclusively in HR positions. So they recently ran a poll on LinkedIn, and the question was this: has your company utilized fractional HR executives? And there were three possible answers: yes, no, and what the heck is fractional HR? I added the heck. The poll didn't really actually say
Right,
heck, but I added that.
right.
And so get this, out of 95 responses, the answer, what is fractional HR, received 55% of the vote. So more than
Wow.
half of the respondents weren't actually sure what fractional is. And I'm actually not very surprised by this. So the term fractional, you just alluded to this, it's being used by everyone these days, but it's really not clearly defined. And quite frankly, I would argue it's being a bit overused, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at kind of how this came to be, so think about there being this two-sided marketplace. You've got hiring companies and you've got job seekers. And we just talked about the fact that very few companies are hiring. And we know there are many people on the market. So companies are turning to contractors for help because they need marketers on their team, but they don't have the headcount. And then there are all these marketers who are in between business cards, as we like to say, who are more than happy to take on a contract engagement until the market picks back up. So you've got the need on the one side, but they don't have the headcount budget. And you've got plenty of people who maybe don't intend to be contractors or consultants for the rest of their careers, but it's a nice stopgap for while they're in between jobs. So where the confusion comes in is the use of the term fractional versus, say, what I just said was contractor or consultant. And they're really often being conflated these days. So
Yeah.
how we differentiate between the two is fractional executives are just that. They're executives. So they've typically held senior level positions, whether it be in marketing, HR, finance, sales, or ops. Companies bring them in to help with strategic challenges. For marketing, this could be developing a go-to-market plan for a new product or maybe a new vertical, or maybe they're brought in to help rethink the marketing organization and or their future hiring needs. And then they can also be brought in to lead the marketing team in cases, say, where we have a lot of growth stage technology companies who, they're ready to hire their first marketing leader, but they're not quite sure what they want to commit to, whether it's a full-time CMO or at a different level.
Yeah.
So a fractional CMO, fractional marketing leader could be a really good solution to help, identify we need a leader now, but we're not quite sure if we want to commit to full-time to the higher end or the cost. Or another option is, another use case, I guess I should say, is in the recent case with one of our clients, their current CMO was leaving, and she was leaving on really good terms, and she really wanted to help basically backfill her
Mm.
within a fractional CMO while
Yeah.
they started the search for a full-time person to take on her job. So came to us, and we dropped in one of our most experienced fractional or CMO experienced people. And so that the team was still being managed, the trains were still running, but while they looked for the permanent replacement, in the end, it so happens that they ended up hiring our fractional CMO, but that was definitely not the initial reason for asking her to step in. So that's fractional. A contractor or consultant, whatever you want to call it, tends to be fill a lower level position. And I'm not saying a low level position. We've placed many director and senior manager marketing contractors, but they're not executives. And oftentimes they're hired in a way that we would call staff augmentation, meaning they're part of the marketing team, just not on the payroll. So whereas a fractional executive tends to be part-time 1099 contractors, or many have their own LLCs, and they're often working with several clients at a time. A lot of time your contractor is working 30, 40 hours a week as though they're part of the team. They're just, not a W-2 employee at that point.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And definitely, yeah, with all the terms, marketers love their acronyms and their jargon and stuff like that. So it's good to clear some of this stuff up for sure.
Before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to a sponsor of the show, Partner Hero. Customer service outsourcing has long been available mainly to large enterprise businesses with long-term contracts and onerous procurement processes. Partner Hero is challenging business as usual and bringing the benefits of outsourcing to small and medium businesses as well as startups. With short, flexible contracts and fast ramp-up times, Partner Hero is making customer support outsourcing a viable option for small and medium businesses and startups. It's perfect for companies with seasonality expecting a temporary spike in volume or that simply need to scale up. And their focus on quality means your customers will get an experience that feels like it comes from your team. If you're ready to bring in outside customer support help for your company that feels like it's part of your existing team, check out Partner Hero. Head on over to partnerhero.com/agile, that's partnerhero.com/AGILE, to book a free consultation with their solutions team. Mention you heard about Partner Hero from the Agile brand and they'll waive the setup fee. Now let's get back to the show.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the continuing saga of return to the office. Still not over. It's still going. So, there seemed to be a lot of talk about productivity during COVID when everyone was working remotely. Despite a few very vocal skeptics, how are things trending now?
Oh, it's really interesting to watch this. And I would say your use of the word saga is not overstating it. So here's what we're seeing. So at the start, everyone knows at the start of and during COVID, everyone was working from home. And companies, I think after their initial shock, looked around and they said, hey, our people are just as productive, if not more, than when they used to
Right.
come into the office. But I feel like there's been this shift in, like, let's say the last 6 months or so. I mean, things have changed when Zoom announces its employees have to be back in the office.
Right, right.
I mean, the irony of that. But I'm being a bit facetious, but we definitely have seen this shift. We've gone from the majority of our searches allowing for remote hires to most of our clients in the last few months saying they want the candidates to be able to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. And so there's been this change from look how productive our employees have been during COVID to what I would categorize as almost a growing skepticism on the part of management that their employees are really working. And if you think about it, I think we've all subliminally contributed to this thinking. Many people are maybe subconsciously, or maybe Freud's involved, referring to it as return to work when it's really return to the office.
Right.
So subliminally, we're kind of creating this, we're adding to this concern. And I think there's a fear of loss of innovation, and which I don't think is unfounded. Think about it. As we all know, spontaneous hallway conversations or grabbing a bunch of people to jump into a conference room to whiteboard out an idea. I mean, it does not happen on Zoom. There's nothing spontaneous on Zoom. And then being in person also builds what I call the connective tissue of the organization. So where you get to know other people in different departments and other parts of the company. Maybe it's ops, finance, or HR. And understanding everyone's collective role makes you feel more connected to the overall mission of the company and ultimately makes you more likely to stay when the market picks up or recruiters like me come a-calling.
Right. Right. Yeah, I definitely agree that I think there's some lost opportunities for making connections, whether that's related to relationships or innovative ideas or, just kind of building bridges and stuff like that. Definitely. You mentioned and I've seen as well, a lot of companies, they're not asking for 5 days a week. They're asking for two or three, maybe. Some are probably asking for 5 days a week. But is hybrid the way to go here?
Our clients seem to think so. And personally, I think so too. And I have to caveat that by, I've been around for a while. I was raised going into the office, so I do have a bias here.
Right.
Um, but it's not as simple as, okay, everyone be back in the office on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Companies let people move away during the pandemic. New hires were hired as remote employees, remote only. Is it really fair to tell an employee that you now have to commute to the office 2 days a week because you live within the defined radius of the office? And we're also seeing like it's really arbitrary.
Yeah.
We know some companies that say if you're within X miles of the office, you have to come in. I have a friend who the rule is if you're within an hour of the office, which,
Huh.
you could drive really slowly and claim that it took you longer.
Right.
Um,
Right. Drive like 2 miles per hour
that's right. And say,
slower.
well, it
Yeah.
took me an hour and a half. um, but, there are others who don't have to come in because they live further away or outside whatever that defined radius. I mean, they don't have to worry about the extra gas expense. Maybe they'd actually have to hire someone to meet their kids off the bus
Right.
where they don't have today. Maybe they're caring for an elderly parent who lives with them. So this is really hard stuff. Here's an extreme example. So my son recently graduated from college and works, thank God he has a job, for a global insurance company. So he started back in June. And at that time, he was required to go into the local office here every other Wednesday. Last week, they announced that certain groups, certain teams would be required to come in 5. So 5 days a week,
Oh, wow.
going from 0 or like, half
Yeah.
to 5. And meanwhile, his team, which is global, so nobody's not, there's no critical mass near an office, doesn't have to go in at all.
Wow. Wow.
So really, really extreme, and I would say not particularly equitable pivot. And you
Right.
can imagine the backlash on the all hands meetings that he's been listening in on.
Yeah, so it's a matter of, getting in on the right team, right? And then what are your incentives to, uh, yeah, it sets up a lot of challenges, right? Because yeah,
It's
what does it say about you if you're lobbying to be on the team that doesn't have to go in the office
right,
versus
right,
does? And yeah, and it may be for very innocuous reasons, as you mentioned, of just like daycare or other
right.
things like that, not just that you're slacking off watching TV all day or,
Right,
or
right.
something
And
like that.
you're going to admit you won't be able to watch Netflix for half the day.
Right,
Um,
right, exactly.
There's also a converse to this. So back in the day where everybody was in the office, except for like that handful of remote people who would be like voices coming out of the Polycom in the ceiling, for those of us
Right.
who even remember what a Polycom is, those employees who now aren't coming into the office a couple days a week while their peers are, they may end up feeling marginalized again, like it used to often be the case
Yeah.
pre-pandemic, because they're not getting the face time with their boss or management, or they're not part of those spontaneous hallway conversations that I talked about earlier. So this is really tricky. And at some point, it's going to settle into some standard, but right now the answers aren't very clear or easy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, we've talked a bit about the leadership and the hiring managers and their perspective on things. How are candidates dealing with this return to the office? Are they adjusting? I mean, you mentioned the anecdote about your son, but are they slowly kind of going back to the old ways of doing things, or is this are we kind of headed for another standoff here? And yeah.
the uh, the automaker strike.
Right,
Um,
right.
well, we're seeing mixed reactions. So some candidates are excited about going to the office and seeing people in real life. I don't think we've had one single candidate ever say to us they want to go back 5 days a week.
Yeah,
But some actually, when we tell them that the client is requiring hybrid, or client is now officially on a hybrid schedule, they're actually excited to have that opportunity.
yeah,
But what's really interesting? We still talk to a lot of candidates who want to remain 100% remote, and they will say straight up that they are willing to take a pay cut to do so.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's once you've kind of shifted to the lifestyle, right? It's hard to kind of go back.
Yeah. Yeah, although
Mm.
we do have some people who do want to, but again, like I said, nobody wants to do it 5 days a week because we all know that if, the productivity we can have like outside of work, but during the work hours, if you can, empty the dishwasher or throw in a load of laundry. And then for some, it's really, I mean, it's a lifestyle with their family they've been able to create.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, Sue, thanks so much for joining the show. One last question before we wrap up. You've given some great advice already, but what's one piece of advice you would have for marketing leaders that are in that process of planning for 2024?
I would take a look at your team and be on the lookout for burnout. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of marketing teams are really lean right now. We talk to a lot of people who, are employed, but they're simply exhausted, which means they're flight risks. The minute the job market picks back up, they're going to be looking to leave. So as you
Sure.
think about making the case for your headcount budget next year, don't just function on, the functional needs of your team or the soft skills.
Right, right.
Think about the attrition risk you may have if you don't bring on more resources. And if, let's just say, full-time headcount just isn't an option, you're just not going to get approval, or you're only going to get one and you really need five. Bringing in an internal contractor, like we talked about, to shoulder some of your team's load is a really good solution. And one that, as I mentioned earlier, you can typically pay for out of your discretionary programs budget. That way you can avoid any of those sticky headcount conversations with HR.
Again, I'd like to thank Sue Keith, Corporate Vice President at Ceres Talent, a marketing recruiting firm run by modern-day marketing matchmakers, for joining the show. You can learn more about Sue and Ceres Talent by following the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.